Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Jack. Back in to talk about Holy or Disc in Mythic Plus. I've already made a video about this for rating, of course, for the Tomb of Sargeras, and I'll probably be making another one for Antorus because I do plan to be playing both when the raid comes out. But I wanted to talk right now about Mythic Plus. We've already seen the Mythic Plus guides for Disc and Holy respectively, and I've been talking to you guys about how I've been playing both, and I've been playing and doing a lot of high keys and stuff like that on my stream. If you want to check it out, links in the description below. But I haven't really made a video talking about, if you want to play both, which I would encourage, how you go about planning which one you want to be playing for which instance. All right, so this is what the video is going to be about and what I wanted to kind of talk about here, because I have been switching as I've been getting into higher and higher keys. I have been actually switching it up more and more, and I've been finding there are a lot more solid strengths to having one spec over the other depending on the instance that you're going into. So a lot of times when I was pushing higher keys earlier on, I was thinking to myself, yeah, I really like Disc because you're having these absorbs, you have personal damage reduction, you have all this stuff, which is really great. But by the same token, Holy does have some sizable advantages that really are highlighted in specific instances. And these are things that, you know, they keep on showing up again and again and again, that you really want to be able to take advantage of them, and you're able to see on specific instances that you can make your life a hell of a lot easier as a result. So one thing to always kind of keep in mind is, you know, how you're able to deal with the healing, but also how you're able to contribute damage at the same token. You know, this does kind of have that advantage where a very large amount of their healing is still going to be through atonement, so you're still actively dealing damage as you're going through this. And a lot of times this translates into boss damage. And this is one thing where I'd give the favor to Discipline Priest of generally having a lot more favorable boss damage, because a lot of times, you know, there are instances of dealing with moderate damage to low damage. It's all through atonement, it's all through DPSing. And only in specific scenarios do they have to fully switch gears into Shadow Men, Shadow Covenant healing, things like that, in order to keep people topped off. But a lot of it, at these high keys, you're pumping in lots and lots of single target boss damage. And I often find that my single target boss damage is usually a lot higher playing Disc than it is with Holy, because I have to kind of split off from healing, from damage as Holy to start healing people, get them topped, and then I'm able to move back. Whereas Disc, I'm able to just apply a quick atonement, and then I'm moving on and just keep on DPSing from there. So a little bit of a difference there. While Holy does really have strong AoE damage, you have to look at how relevant it's going to be for your group. So, for example, if you're going to be having, you know, limited, gigantic pulls where you have, you know, Arms Warriors and Boomkins and everything else just to blow up a bunch of ads all at once, well, maybe it's not as big of a deal if you're adding, you know, maybe 1,000,000 DPS of Holy Nova healing. You know, you kill things a little bit faster. But if your CC chains are good, your stuns are good, things like that, then you're going to be making sure that those things are going to be locked down before they can ever really deal damage to you. And you shouldn't really hit that point where they start going wild and you need to be able to get extra DPS to get them down. Because that's one of the things with higher keys is, as groups get better and better at chaining CCs together, the quicker mobs get annihilated and the quicker mobs get overkilled in many ways, where they have so much damage and we have so much focus on the AoE that you're not really having to deal with a lot of the mobs in terms of, I need to get extra damage out, which is something that, you know, Discipline would kind of struggle with, where they're able to dot up a bunch of targets, but if you're nuking everything, then it's not a huge effect. Whereas Holy Nova is just instant right there in your face. So if you're in a positive group where you're able to take care of AoE trashbacks very easily, then you're looking more at the boss damage and pumping out more boss damage and things like that. So that definitely comes into play. Now, when you're looking at boss fights in particular, you have to look at how you're healing those boss fights. Because a lot of trashbacks, you're more or less able to be taking care of them with either spec. In terms of the healing that's output there, you know, absorbs can help a lot for certain mobs, like any of the like shooters or the archers, I should say, in Black or Cold, or the pelters in Nelth's Lair. You know, they're just going to be throwing big rocks at targets, and having extra shielding, having extra effective health, having, you know, a low cooldown on penance to be able to direct penance into a low health target, things like that can be very, very useful, because you really have to be targeting either the pelter or the archer and looking at their target, the target of target, who they're going to be hitting next, preparing shields in advance, or maybe like a backup atonement and or backup penance and things like that, just in case they get haywire. You know, that's a big advantage for Discipline. Whereas Holy, you're kind of having to wait for the damage to actually happen, and then you're able to use a Holy Word to top them off. Whereas you need to quickly generate another Holy Word to make sure that somebody else who's going to get pelted or shot at another point is not going to get killed in the same vein. We're about to enter, of course, a Raging Week, so it's going to become even more important of making sure when those ads hit a specific breakpoint, you're able to deal with them either through CC, or you're going to be able to knock them out of range, because a lot of these things you can outrange, or you're just making sure you have some kind of healing ready for those people when you need it, right? Going into specific boss fights, the healing required during the specific boss fights, because like I said, the trash packs, you can usually heal with either spec. It kind of depends on what tank that you might have in terms of what kind of cooldowns they might be preferring. But boss fights, you can have many phases that can be pretty debilitating towards one spec or another. One thing that really stands out that can really hurt Holy Priest is if you have consistent burst damage effects. Nell Slayer is a huge example of this, where you're getting the very first boss, Rockmora, which is dealing about 80%, 90% of your HP every single time, and that's assuming you do the mechanics right. So having a little extra shielding, having a 30-second cooldown on Fade's damage reduction, it's not a lot, but it's going to be enough to keep you alive, and that's the important part. Whereas Holy, if you're not precisely topped off, then you can just die innately. You just straight up get one shot. And that's one of the things you have to be dealing with, and you have to be prepared for. You can even see fights kind of like Hirja or Xavius, where there's a lot of burst damage on one target, or you'll have things like the Void Bolt, which can one-shot. You have things like the Prey on the Weak, which can deal tons and tons of burst damage to an individual target. So preparing a shield in advance, maybe using Clarity of Will can help out a lot with that. Whereas Holy, you need to be able to burst them back up really quick, or you're expending the use of your Guardian Spirit in order to save somebody. So those are things you really got to watch out for. But on the other hand, Disc can struggle as well, because when you're looking at certain boss fights where there's tons of sustained damage and very high levels of that damage, you have to be looking out for being able to sustain that, especially when targets can swap. Some bosses can go immune, some bosses will move around, some will disappear, things like that. I mean, Cathedral is a prime example where you're having the transition phase where there's a lot of damage going out, and the boss mobs that you can hit can be pretty rapidly fleeting, so you have to be retargeting, redotting, all these things all at once you have to be watching out for. And similar thing can happen with Glazer in Vault of the Wardens, where you're having the boss taking all this less damage, but you have to also focus on the Fell Pillar that comes up, get that down quickly to stop a lot of the heavier damage that's going on while you're kind of dodging around there. So those are two fights that really stand out to me as saying, hey, this is going to be a lot more favorable for me playing Holy, because there's not burst damage that can one-shot me, and there's pretty sustained damage that requires high HPS, which you can pump out a little bit more easily if you're playing straight up Holy, and you're not having to worry too much about maintaining the atonements, and you're just more worried about just getting everybody in range of your prayer of healings, getting everybody in for a Sanctify, and you're able to kind of push into the next phase without too much of an issue here. So, by the same token, though, HPS isn't everything. Just this past week, I did 2 different cost 20s, Quarter Stars 20s, and for the second to last boss, the Flame Reaver, I had 2 different groups, one which was far more messy than the other. First group, we had the imps up for a much longer period of time, and as a result I did about 1.9 million HPS over the course of it. I ran Velens, I ran C-Star, all I was doing was just healing. I didn't really deal any damage because I just didn't have time, and I was always worried about getting my Prayer of Mendings out, getting extra healing out, and I just straight healed through it. The other group, however, I ended up playing Disc for, and I did about 1.6 million HPS, give or take. And that group is a lot cleaner. I was able to lean on Barrier. I had my own, I had Fade as my damage reduction. You're having extra shielding going on people. And then the ads just died faster, right? So HPS is not going to be the entire story, because a lot of it's going to be how your group can most easily deal with things. But it will be the type of damage and how you're best able to heal with it. Court of Stars is sort of the anomaly instance where I can feel very strongly saying I really like playing Holy on Vault of the Wardens or Cathedral of Eternal Night. Feels amazing. Something like Nell Slayer, I definitely feel way more comfortable playing Discipline for, because like I said, that big burst damage that can go out on people is very scary. So having extra absorbs, damage reduction really is very favorable. When you get into an instance like Court of Stars, and I've even talked to a couple other priests who are pushing high keys like Hante, he even was talking to me about it, was just saying, yeah, I switch specs halfway through the dungeon because it's easier that way, where he will take on the first 2 bosses as Holy, and then for the last boss he'll switch his Disc because of how high that burst damage can ramp up from the captain at the very end, where you're saying there's so much damage going on, having damage reduction, having barrier, having big bursts of healing at specific moments is a lot more favorable to me than trying to get people topped off with my Holy Words, which don't have quite a fast enough cooldown on a fight like the last boss in Court of Stars, where it just happens very, very fast pulses of damage that you really need to be able to reverse quickly. So those are all things to kind of consider. And while you are able to play either spec successfully in keys and in most high keys, when you're getting into the higher levels, I'm definitely feeling it myself, where it's very important to be able to switch gears and play both of them to the best of your ability. You know, Holy is what many people consider like B or C tier in terms of Mythic Plus pushing, but by greater optimization of your spec, of your class, you are able to hang out with the best of them, and you are able to push very, very high keys. You are able to get good timing and stuff like that with these things, and you are able to be successful. And that's the biggest thing I wanted to be pushing out with this, is that you can be successful, you know, by practicing these instances, working with solid teams, and coordinating as best as you can, because you do have the advantages, you know, depending on what spec you play. You know, you do have an AoE fear, you do have, you know, a big knockback that you're able to put out. You can spec into a 5-second stun as a Holy Priest there, where you're able to, you know, completely lock down certain mobs that are really, really dangerous to watch out for. So you have these advantages, and that's one thing to kind of consider, is that Mythic Plus is more than just healing. It's more than just damage. You know, it's utilizing your entirety of your toolkit, and this is what basically healing was meant to be. And I love that the fact that Mythic Plus is this format where we are pushed to our limits, and all these things start coming into play in order to actually survive, in order to actually thrive in these dungeons. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.